Planning and Zoning Commission, Wednesday, September 15th, 2021, 7 p.m. meeting to order. First item on the agenda, introduction of commission members. Doug Regeller, John Emery.
Mike Clayton.
Anupreet Minhas.
Okay. Third item on the agenda, approval of the agenda.
Move approval.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those who disapprove, say nay. So approved. Okay, item number 4, approval of the minutes of the September 1st, 2021 meeting.
Move approval. Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I'll abstain. I was
Okay.
absent.
All those not in favor, say nay. Hearing none, so approved. Okay. The Planning and Zoning Commission is an independent advisory body of the city of Ames City Council. The Planning and Zoning Commission members are volunteers of the community and not part of the city administration. The commission is responsible for the preparation and adoption of official comprehensive plan of the city and gives advice and recommendations on matters involving amendments to the zoning ordinance and the historic preservation ordinance and guidelines, subdivisions, annexations, master plans, and major site development plans, and developments within the Ames urban fringe areas. As an advisory commission, we welcome all comments and questions. We make our recommendations based on code, the facts presented, the input from the public. If the proceedings become lengthy, we may ask that comments be focused on new information not previously presented. You may speak only once on an agenda item. If you wish to speak, please fill out a speaker information card and present it to the recording secretary. We ask that you come to the microphone to speak so that all comments may be recorded. Please state your name, address for the record prior to making any comments. The order of the proceedings for each item on the agenda will be as follows. City staff will present the staff report regarding the agenda item. Commission members will have the opportunity to ask questions of city staff. The applicant will be invited to make statements regarding the request. Commission members will have an opportunity to ask questions of the applicant. Members of the audience will be invited to come forward to offer comments and questions. Once the public comment is closed, city staff and the applicant will have an opportunity for concluding remarks. The commission will discuss the application based on all the presentations and any comments given and come to a recommendation for the city council. The discussion may include further questions of city staff and the applicant for clarification. With that, we'll move on to the agenda. The next item on the agenda, the public forum. If anybody has any comments on anything other than what's on the agenda, please feel free to come forward and speak. Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 6. Public hearing for the Ames Urban Fringe Plan map amendment for 2305 Dayton Avenue. And I think I have to ask a question of Kelly to start with. Isn't that 2305 and 2105?
The map on page 7 shows 2105 Dayton and 2421 Dayton.
So amend the,
Let's hold on for a second. So I'm just going to look at what 2305 goes to.
Oh.
There is no 2305.
2105 should be the land just north of,
Yeah.
south, yeah, just north of BNSF. BN, not BNSF, BASF.
So 2715 Dayton is the Eagles Loft Nursery School. 2105 is one of the addresses, and 2421. So 2305 is not an official address, but it's in that address range of the 80 acres. So I think for notification purposes, it's in the middle of the location we're talking about, but there's not official addresses when there's not actually structures there. So I think we're fine to proceed with the item.
Okay, it just says on the item number 6 on the form, it says 2105
Yep, so I-
and 2421.
Correct. So on the agenda, that address is in the center of the 80 acres we're talking about. So I think for notification purposes, the agenda title is legitimate so that we can continue with that hearing. And then as you noted in the staff report, there were 2 different parcel numbers, which Justin has just put up there, that reflect the parcel addresses that are in Beacon as well. So I think we're okay to proceed. We'll work with it from the staff report map rather than the agenda title.
Okay. And
Kelly, I'm assuming when the public notices went out, it probably had a legal description, correct, of the properties?
It would have had a property identification and a letter to a 300-foot radius around the properties.
Okay.
If you have the letter with you to see what was placed.
I do not have that on me at the moment.
This is probably getting into the weeds, but was the notification sent to 2105 and 2421? The notification is sent from both of those 300 feet, or is it from 2305 and 300 feet?
So in GIS, we would have selected both parcels and ran a
Correct.
Okay.
standard 300-foot buffer for both sites.
Yeah, gotcha.
So I believe we've noticed everything correctly. There are inconsistencies in that map and on the agenda, but I think the location is clear. If you were to look that up, it lands in that address range.
and as Ruth is saying, the notifications are copacetic also.
As far as I know, yes.
Correct.
They
Yeah.
include-
So we would have done that through GIS, selected it. It would have been all through that process.
Okay. With that, city staff can present.
All right. So the land use policy plan map change request that you have in front of you there for the 2 addresses that we just discussed, 2105 and 2421 Dayton Avenue. That application was submitted by Chuck Winkleblack of Hunziker Companies. The property owner is TGFA LLC. That is the property owner of both of those parcels shown there, which are the parcels in the request. So this request constitutes just over 73 acres of land. And this process is the first step in changing the land use map in order to make the land use designation here suitable for annexation under our the Ames Urban Fringe Plan and our land use policy plan. So back earlier this summer, the Ames City Council directed staff to take a look at our inventory of small scale industrial lots. And when the conclusion of that study was that in terms of the market here in Ames, we are very low on the number of lots that are available. Small scale lots would be lots under 10 acres. So the applicant has proposed to annex land here into the city to be developed for smaller scale industrial size lots. So as part of that, the planned industrial designation is under the urban services category, and that the urban services category must be achieved to bring land in. In addition to that, Ames Plan 2040, which I'll show you here, contemplates or actually plans for this property to fall under the employment category. So in Ames Plan 2040, The type of industrial designation that the developer is seeking would be compatible under the employment designation there that you see up on the map, and that covers business and industrial development. Just to give you a quick idea too, these types of sites that are envisioned here once it would come into the city would be those similar to what you would see, for example, along Bell Avenue. We have the East Industrial area, which is known as the Prairie View Industrial Area. That is targeted for larger scale industry. That's east of I-35. So again, these would be those smaller shops and businesses like you would see along Bell currently. And that would be compatible under the general industrial designation. Right now, the right-of-way along Dayton is all controlled by Story County. Once we annex this, the right-of-way of Dayton from the north property line, right near Eagles Loft on south, will come under full control of the city. Right now, the city limits go down the center of Dayton, and Story County has jurisdictional control over Dayton Avenue in front of this location. With that, that summarizes it generally. One point to clarify, the green natural area up in the northwest corner of the property is being maintained as natural area. That is not being changed. There's detention up there. There's also a small cemetery and wooded area. So the area that's being changed would be the area on the properties outside of that, as we noted in the report. So I can take any questions at this time that you might have for further detail.
I'm just going to point out this is kind of a little nuance to the fringe plan. So Justin mentioned that the natural area stays natural area. So it does become urban service area as kind of that underneath layer, which allows us to annex it. So we're not going to parcel off the natural area and eventually leave that in the county. So we will annex the natural area along with the proposed planned industrial, assuming all of these amendments are approved. So just to be clear, it's a little unclear in the fringe plan how to deal with natural area through annexation, because it's described as an undevelopable kind of designation, yet it's part of the property, so it needs to come in when we annex the property. And that's been done before, so I just want to clarify that's how it would be done here also.
Mm-hmm.
And the boundaries of it is shown on attachment C.
Correct. Yeah. What you have here, let's get this oriented for you. So this is the existing property right here. It's having a little trouble focusing, but that's the property as it exists. This is the Eagles Loft Daycare to the north, and then BASF is to the south down here. This is Dayton Avenue with the USDA here across the street. So the orientation is north this direction.
North is to the left.
Left.
Correct.
Right or left?
Left.
To the left.
Justin, if essentially, if this were to change kind of designation, what general uses, I guess, would be allowed in this type of an area?
So in planned industrial under our current fringe plan, the planned industrial targets a more of a office park, business park type feel or setting. Now, the goal eventually of the developer and of the types of lots that the city council envisions to be able to accommodate are best suited more under the general industrial zoning category. So with the timeline that Ames Plan 2040 is on, once the land is eventually annexed, we will very likely have a new comprehensive plan in place. Mm-hmm. So at that point, then when rezoning takes place, employment would allow for the general industrial zoning to be applied. Under your current land use plan, planned industrial wouldn't support general industrial zoning.
Okay.
As far as the underlying land use to the zoning.
And general industrial is kind of a higher I guess, or a more intense use potentially, or does have some more intense uses within it?
Potentially, the better way to think of it, it just allows for a wider variety of uses.
Okay.
So you could have offices, service businesses, things like that. You could have storage facilities, those sorts of things. Planned industrial would be more narrowly focused on, again, more like office parks, and just has a narrower range of permitted uses.
But with that said, PI allows full range of manufacturing and R&D uses, the same as GI. So even though it's designed as an office park zoning district, it allows for the same intense uses. Like you can have a Danfoss facility in PI
Okay.
or GI. Barilla is a PI use.
Yeah.
So again,
Okay.
very intense. What it really did was kind of limit those more heavy industrial fringe uses or more service contractor kind of uses that GI supports, but the core uses are the same in PI and GI.
Okay.
So the research park would be PI?
So the research park was originally constructed under PI. Now we have research park zoning, which is a little bit different. So think of that. So the research park, PI was designed to match the research park.
Okay.
And then GI is kind of the legacy zoning district that covers almost all of the east side of Ames.
Right away, if after the annexation, it drops back to agricultural again, correct?
Correct. It'll stay at ag until a rezoning application is submitted. And if the comprehensive plan is not adopted and we're looking at the land use policy plan, we'll have to see whether an LUPP amendment is required or necessary to go along with whatever's proposed as a rezoning. So it's a little bit in front of us. We don't know for sure how the applicant would propose it or how city council would look at something. It's just because we're on that timeline of where Plan 2040 might have different guidance than the current land use plan.
But it'll come back before us for rezoning.
Yes, yes.
So it could potentially come in as GI or PI at the time of rezoning?
I think it depends on what the status of Plan 2040 is. So that it's a one-to-one relationship in the current land use plan. So if it's PI, it needs to go to planned industrial zoning. If it's general industrial designation, it has to go to GI zoning.
Gotcha.
It's Plan 2040 that uses an employment category with differentiation to be applied at the time of rezoning, not in a one-to-one relationship.
At our last meeting, one of the things we discussed was the proposed developments down on South Duff off of Buckeye and South 16th Street. And on the east side of, the west side of Buckeye, there was one of the things that had changed from what was approved in 2019 was one of the new lot lines where they were putting in the proposing commercial. Okay, and I see here the line between these two lots, between 2105 and 2421, kind of cuts through two of the lots. Is that going to be a problem at a future date, or is that totally different?
It's just totally irrelevant. I mean,
Okay.
that's a concept drawing from a preliminary meeting that
Okay,
is not a plat. So when you replat a property, those other lot lines or those really quarter section lines go away.
okay.
Yeah, so you can't look at, I know that was included by the applicant as part of their request. Do not believe that you're approving that subdivision layout.
All right.
That was to illustrate their
Okay.
goal for the type of development,
Yep.
regardless of the zoning district. So you should be making your decision based on the general nature of it being suitable to be being added to the city and appropriate for some kind of industrial zoning, not that subdivision.
It was just meant to highlight smaller scale industrial
Yeah,
sites.
that's why they included it.
Okay.
It was their submittal, not ours, that
Right.
was included.
Okay.
Okay, the next item on there should be the applicant, and you guys had an email from them, or?
Yep, we had that email that we sent along to you from Mr. Winkleblack. So he was not able to be here tonight. I don't know if there's anyone else here in his place to speak, but he was not. He wanted to pass comments along to you from himself since he wasn't able to be here.
Do you want to read them into the record? Or?
No, we don't need to read it into the record. we'll do that with correspondence typically. So it was just correspondence before the public hearing for your information.
So we can move forward with this if we choose.
Absolutely.
Okay, members of the audience are invited to come forward to offer comments and questions on this item. Seeing none. Public comment is now closed. City staff and the applicant will have an opportunity for concluding remarks.
Nothing
None?
further.
Commission.
Pretty straightforward.
I have no comments.
At this time, I'll entertain any motions.
I would move approval of alternative 1, that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommends that the city council approves a minor amendment to the Ames Urban Fringe Plan land use class and framework maps from rural service and agricultural conservation area as agriculture and farm service to urban service area as planned industrial for the area comprising approximately 73.18 acres at 2105 and 2421 Dayton Avenue.
I'll second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. There are no nays, so this is approved. And item number 7,
All right.
the Ames 2040 plan comments.
So I'm going to move down to the computer here. So just a second. So at our September 1st meeting, we had a short refresher, just kind of reminding everybody about the 6 chapters that are in Plan 2040 and the process we had gone through to get to this public draft that was released on September 1st. And at the Planning Commission's meeting on the 1st, we discussed what we were going to do tonight. It was left, we would just use the plan and look at questions or interests that had been brought up by the commission. I did not receive any questions or comments in advance of the meeting. I said I would forward those to you if I got those. We did not receive those. So for tonight, we really are just looking at the plan. And I think we discussed last time, it's 130 pages. I don't plan to go through it page by page. What I was thinking about as I was getting ready for tonight, I was thinking where or what sections are the ones that are probably most relevant to the Planning and Zoning Commission. So through the lens of development, which is typically what the commission is seeing, most of those points of interest are going to be found in the growth and land use chapters. And then housing policy includes some of the projections to help understand kind of the quantities that we're talking about. And then the other chapters kind of fill in around the edges. So the transportation network, the Planning and Zoning Commission doesn't directly deal with how traffic improvements are done in the city. But in this plan, the traffic improvements relate to how we view certain land use categories succeeding. So to me, it's more of it's a secondary kind of chapter to the role that the Planning and Zoning Commission usually functions in, but it's very critical to the overall plan. And then you can look at parks, open space, and trails, and the environment kind of in that same way that the environment chapter is kind of identifying the constraints that we work with and some of our stewardship and sustainability goals that we have as a community overall. And sometimes those do directly relate to actual development standards. This would be a reason why we have our stormwater management chapter, why we have our floodplain regulations in the Ames Municipal Code. So those kinds of constraints do lead to regulatory standards, but you're not, again, as the commission, regularly addressing environmental issues for the city. You're applying standards that we have adopted to projects that are proposed before you. And then again, in the parks and open space, as it relates to development, very, very rarely is the commission looking at an open space or a park proposal. We do propose as part of this that we work on a park dedication ordinance to help guide future decisions for rezoning and subdivisions. So that would be an implementation measure to come later. We currently do not have a park dedication requirement. It's something that is negotiated on an ad hoc basis. We think we can formulate a framework that helps guide that, because as we expand, there's clearly a need to add substantial parkland to the city. It will not all be neighborhood parks. We also need to acquire land as the city for community parks that serve larger areas, not just neighborhoods. So for the most part, those policies are really guiding, again, kind of the way to integrate open space and green space into the developments from a park and recreation perspective. It also ties together trails and the idea that mobility kind of works through informal paths to get through the community, as well as the formal routes that you see on the roadways or the shared use path systems that we have in the city. So with those, we are not programming parks. That's the Parks and Recreation Commission's job. Which capital projects happen, that's the City Council's job. So again, we don't see those very often at the Planning and Zoning Commission level. So I'd say, again, that's probably a secondary or tertiary kind of chapter for the commission. And then the new chapter for us is the Community Character chapter. So that's one we're going to have to feel out as a community and see how that influences development standards. And maybe it doesn't influence development standards, and it really sets a tone for maybe public investment that happens in the city related to beautification, to gateway enhancements, to different types of public projects. So that one we'll have to feel out. It does support that through the development review process that we should look at character from an architectural perspective, especially in the context of infill, that we need to develop probably guidelines that we don't currently have to help guide architectural compatibility, as we're going to be more focused at times on infill or relationships to different streetscapes that we currently are not emphasizing in our plan. So that one we can talk through. It's going to be a little bit of a hodgepodge because it covers everything from historic preservation to support for public art to having better design characteristics of buildings. And so that one's kind of a grab all for everything. So for me, I think the emphasis again is understanding the land use chapter. It's the most common thing that you're going to see. And then the housing neighborhood sub-area chapter relates to that from to some degree as well in terms of how we see development occurring. But with that overall kind of description of how I viewed those chapters through the eyes of what I think the Planning and Zoning Commission is going to see, that's my take on it. But then tonight we're really here to hear from the commission what concerns you have, what issues you think are a priority. Are there things that are missing from the plan? And I'm going to turn it over to you guys to tell me how to go through this from here.
Well, how did everyone kind of do their review? I kind of started at the beginning and
I read through the thing.
I
Right.
read through it as much as I could, yeah.
But, I think that I agree with one of the statements is that neighborhoods are important in this town, and the character of the neighborhood should be preserved. And I better understand after reading it. I better understood that $150,000 houses and below, the only way we're going to have those names is what we have right now. And we heard from, I think is Mr. Winkleback before about it just not viable to build them anymore.
No, I don't think you could build a market rate home for under $200,000.
Probably.
And all, just to be clear, all the data in here is quite, things changed very quickly this year on the housing front with arguably 10% appreciation in 1 year, kind of across the board in the community. So even to think that this data was from 2009, so you've had 2 years of real estate cycles that were very strong, and not even factoring in construction costs, which is, I think, one of the comments from the Hunziker companies is just the building material inflation in this past year. That alone kind of stops you from being able to build an affordable house on those kind of numbers. So I think the best thing to look at from that housing chart that's giving you a sense of those price points, it's all relative. In some ways, incomes have also gone up, not at the same pace as real estate, but it gives you a good idea of kind of where those buckets of income levels are for households. And there's always going to be lower income, lower middle income, upper middle income, and higher income in the community. And whether it's for a $150,000 house or a $215,000 house, it gives you a sense of kind of where those dividing points are. And I think the price isn't as relevant as just the idea that we shouldn't lose track of that we need to understand where those lower price points are going to be met. And as John said, you can't build it. It's going to be in existing housing, even if that exists.
Right, and,
Yep.
and since we can't build those houses, there'll be houses that are already existing, but we still need to be able to maintain the neighborhoods that they are in and have the, don't lose the feel of the neighborhoods. You know, it's, you know, the maps that you had in the 2020 plan, you know, it's quite evident that we have to build west, southwest, and north, and a little bit to the southeast, but the constraints of the river on the southeast is what we run into there. But again, I think the most important thing that out of the 2040 plan that I got is you got to protect the neighborhoods. You can't have a high rise going, or not a high rise, not names. It can only be 7 stories or something like that. But no,
I would say the plan is not a protectionist neighborhood plan, though. I think it acknowledges the value of our neighborhoods. And I think it's trying to take a step towards strategic change, meaning we don't want to follow the patterns, and I'm going to blame the decade of the 70s, where it was just very common that, oh, we need to add or allow for change here and just blanket zone 6 or 8 square blocks with no real regard for how that works over time. And then you get the reaction to that, like, this is terrible. So we create single family conservation overlays, which just lock it down and nothing ever changes again. Or you do something that's the opposite end of that continuum, because there wasn't great thought put into what the outcome might be and if it was really going to be successful. So this plan is not saying let's rezone single family neighborhoods. It is saying there's probably some opportunity sites in corridors that might make sense to see a step or a half step up in housing types. So maybe it's an option where a single family home can become a 2-family home. It isn't saying we're going to rezone the neighborhood to facilitate every property becoming something else, as someone is financially motivated to do so. So it isn't that it's not protectionist and that it's locking it in. And we have those areas in the current land use plan. We have areas that will not change, have not changed since 1997. So if you think of what we call our UCRM, our urban core residential medium districts, which are essentially the areas that wrap downtown and then go west down Lincoln Way until you get to Iowa Creek. Those are those urban core areas. The last plan said nothing shall change in these areas except for what is here. This plan doesn't do that. It's also not saying we're going to go change them. It's saying we need to investigate that and think about our other goals as a community. How do we provide those options for housing? Is it better to have people from a sustainability perspective have access to the center of the city, be on transit routes, be able to walk to jobs, be able to bike to different places? That we want to analyze those on a case-by-case basis and make informed decisions over the life of the plan rather than say it's locked in for 20 years. That's a big difference from the current plan. It's probably the biggest difference, other than it has 4 directions of growth that we can contemplate. Those are probably the 2 biggest issues.
Kurt, I understand that for the price point for the builders, the apartment house, like the ones we have along Mortensen, are the cat's meow for them, because they get the biggest bang for their buck, but they're not suited for every place.
Correct.
And I guess that's what I'm saying about some type of protection, or not protection, even guidance, where, you know, you're not going to have one of those apartment buildings right down in the middle of a neighborhood.
Well, and I feel like that's what this plan kind of allows for, is more gray area. So it's able to essentially look at what the character of an existing neighborhood is and find ways to support development that's going to also support that existing character. At least that's what I gleaned from it.
Yeah, and
I think it also talks about, when you look at it, like compatibility
Right.
with uses is
Yeah.
is a prominent, it's been called out. So I think that is, and if Kelly, I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit, just to sort of give us a clearer idea for our audience as well as for us, how that compatibility piece might address some
That's
of the
one thing I
concerns.
wanted to
Right.
talk about, was that piece of things, because I think most of us understand, like, here are the proposed land use designations and, you know, growth areas and things like that that we've gone over before. But definitely how the implementation piece of it is planning to go forward in terms of how then those projects would be reviewed and fit into existing neighborhoods.
Yeah, I think it talks about building scale perspective, and I'm curious how that scale of the building as well as intensity of uses kind of features in and plays out into that compatibility when considering it with mixed uses. And I'm thinking how that may or may not also play out in areas that are abutting or adjoining neighborhoods versus slightly more intense areas. For example, I'm just going to throw this out there. The corner of Lincoln and what is it? Highland. I know that had come up quite a bit when we had looked at it in the past, is how that transitions with the neighborhood. So I'm thinking of compatibility of uses with not that specifically necessarily that example itself, but sort of similar situations and how that might play out with this plan.
So I would say at this point, so if you're talking specifically about the compatibility matrix that's in the land use chapter, is that what Ruth and Anu are specifically talking about? That's in there, and it's yet to be determined its utility.
Okay.
So council asked RDG to say, okay, we have a lot of growth in neighborhood policies to talk about infill opportunities and being context sensitive. What does that mean? So RDG put that matrix together to help define what is context sensitive going to mean. And I would say at this point, it's educational as much as it is regulatory. And I think it's a little bit yet to be determined on, are we really going to use that? Is it an interim option? Because for me, I think it needs to be in the zoning more than in the comprehensive plan, but it's a good educational piece. And it might be a bridge piece that lasts for a year and a half to help us through decisions that are before we can get to a zoning district update.
I'm wondering how the development community would see this as well, just given that I know based on the interactions I've had, conversations I've had with developers, sometimes they prefer it more black and white versus gray, like just tell me what standards I need to meet and, you know, we'll get there. I don't know if you've had any feedback from them, if this is something they've seen.
We haven't on that component.
Okay.
We may over the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
And I think the important part is that is mostly going to be guided towards those infill situations,
right,
versus the growth areas. And yeah, so to be honest, I'm not sure exactly how we're going to use it. It might get pared down. It might be for reference. It should, to me, eventually lead to zoning standard updates to be able to deal with it more clearly as we go through these things.
I assume that would feed into the design guidelines that you're talking about.
Yeah, it could. And so you're going to see a kind of a scattering of different infill policies. Like, so when you're in the community character, it talks about having context sensitive design again and again, meaning if it's a 2-story neighborhood, we're not doing 5-story buildings. Now, with that said, if the priority of the community becomes we want transit centric development and we want transit oriented design because Lincoln Way is a transportation corridor and we want higher density, you could find support for that in the plan. You can't find support in the plan to just say, in this general neighborhood, we want to see density just wherever it works. That's not in the plan. So I think that's going to be the difficulty here is because it's a flexible plan and you're going to have different situations, what's the priority at the time you're making that decision? And it wants to rely on sub-area plans to make those at a little bit broader scale than just project by project. So this is definitely set up. We have the Lincoln Way corridor plan, so it's kind of addressed the more obvious areas right now where these things would probably come into play. So I think we have some time to think through what this means, but it would probably prefer to see us do something like a corridor plan or a neighborhood plan and get buy-in to what the changes are that might be acceptable and how that can be done, rather than just roll it out and say this works everywhere across the city when you have two streets that intersect and they're in this particular kind of traffic level.
Well, I appreciate it, I guess, kind of that section.
I actually kind of like it. It's an
Yeah.
unusual element to put into a plan,
Mhm.
into a comprehensive plan. But it definitely speaks to some of the concerns that have been brought up in the past projects. So to that extent, I really appreciate that in being in there, how we operationalize, whether it stays here or sort of a bridge like you mentioned, or I think that it would be interesting to see how that plays out. And I will keep my eye on it.
Yeah, I think there, for infill especially, or for some of the existing neighborhoods, there could be some definite value. I guess the thing for me in terms of like going through the entire document and then like kind of like looking back again, kind of on page 113, they're looking at housing occupation characteristics, and obviously, so in 2000, based on U.S. Census Bureau data, the owner-occupied units in the community were 46.1%, renter was 53.9%. Move forward to 2010, essentially owner occupancy goes down to 42%, renters go up to 57%. Go to 2017, you're seeing owner occupancy at 39.3% and renters at 60%, essentially. And that's concerning, I guess, to me, just because it's like, essentially, we're moving more and more towards kind of, I guess, in terms of the makeup towards rentals, which that's a, pertinent part of a community. But in terms of like stabilizing character and stuff like that, I feel like, there's some value in like ownership of a property and then the folks that are living there really being like, this is really what I want to see the character of my neighborhood look like and things like that. Whereas I feel like sometimes when you have folks who are just coming in and out of the community, it might not be quite the same in terms of the value that they put on community character. I don't know if anyone else kind of saw that.
And I'm
I
wondering,
think that's a symptom of something else. Something that jumped out to me was, and I think I knew this already, but seeing it in print kind of struck me that, if you look at the demographic section on page 13, it's talking about the makeup of the community by age, and that there was a slight increase, in the people moving into their retirement years, but it was offset by a decrease in the population between the ages of 35 and 64. Well,
Right.
So let's take a step back on demographics. So there's kind of two different things that both related. You have to process, which I'm not blaming you because if you don't follow this on a regular basis, Gen X is smaller than both the baby boomer and Gen Y or the millennials. So that 35 to 65 is likely to be lower almost everywhere because the generation is smaller. In some places, people have an advantage and maybe attracted a little bit higher amount of those.
but at the
So
same
that,
point,
that 30 years is going to be a struggle for us, just like most places.
but at the same time, we've added. There's another section that talks about how we've done a really good job of adding private sector jobs.
Yep.
A significant amount. So why aren't those folks living here?
So that comes back then to housing availability,
Yes.
whether it's
Right.
availability or
And
price.
that's my point.
I agree. I don't disagree with that point at all. I just want, whenever we talk about the demographics, it's always good to
Yeah.
understand the generational proportions
Right.
and not just say that that's the reason we don't have it. I think I think the issue is really the housing availability
Mhm.
more so than, and what you see is that the populations are lower in that cohort overall, but we also haven't built the housing to support that same ratio.
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's an important point is while you do see tenant occupied units probably increasing or the proportion increasing over a period of time, you also have to account it in terms of what the increase in the student population is, which is by and large more tenants. Some of the issues we've seen in the community as in terms of reduced or limited ISU infrastructure for those students, which then push them to get out into the neighborhoods, which probably then propel some of those owner-occupied units to be converted. It's sort of all sort of plays into it.
Right.
And then I agree with the fact that, yes, we have increased a lot of people in like private sector jobs, but the availability or that price point that would be more appealing and attractive to that subgroup coming into the community, do we have housing to address their needs? To me, it's like matching your age group
Yep.
with your ownership tenure, along with housing availability and what that inventory looks like. And that, to me, I think might give us a better picture
Yeah,
of
I think,
looking at some of
this
the
all
issues.
ties together.
Yeah,
Did-
absolutely.
Kelly, I'm going back trying to see did they do an assessment to see how many folks commute in and out of the Ames community at all?
We didn't do it with this because it's
Okay.
been done before.
Okay, that's what I wondered.
So that's,
Okay,
and I don't want to quote it because don't have it perfect off the top of my head, but we have that information available. We do it with the transportation plan. It was a big push by the chamber
Okay.
about 5 years ago.
got it.
They did a separate study, and then we reassessed that with the transportation plan through a little
Okay.
similar
It's a big
results.
I've heard the number 2 and it's startling.
Okay, interesting.
I mean, we are definitely a net in commute. We have
Okay.
a fair amount of people that commute out, but then we are definitely net in the probably in the 15,000 job range.
Yep.
So order of magnitude, there's about 15,000 more people that come into the community to work than leave or recycle themselves in
Okay.
here with the
Right,
jobs.
and that is the price point of the entry-level houses is a problem there.
Possibly, or
I
there
don't
could
know
be
that
other
I
factors
don't
too.
know that you can connect the two.
No, I don't
think you
It
can.
would need
Yeah.
a detailed study for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm
'cause-
curious.
'cause that
yeah,
doesn't
look at the
that doesn't
chamber
address
study.
two working households
Yeah.
that just choose to live in the middle of two jobs. Like,
Right, exactly.
price point is a factor, but you can't say it is the factor that results in people in commuting.
Well, in commuting, it's like Nevada's cheaper than Ames.
Mhm.
Story City's cheaper than Ames, not by
So
a whole lot.
I also don't like that kind of characterization in the fact, are we comparing existing housing stock or new construction? Because the cost of a house being built in Gilbert is the same cost as building a house
Correct.
in Ames. So
Gilbert has the same price point as Ames.
yeah, so
And they don't have that many older houses either.
and so we got to be careful. Is it existing housing stock versus new construction? I
Right.
hate when we get blamed for the cost of new construction and we're buying the lumber and the material at the same place
Mhm.
as everybody else that's working in central Iowa. So I don't like that characterization as the planning and housing director. I think it's an unfair one personally.
I think the only thing that you could say is maybe land value would be slightly different,
So-
but not that far
Right.
out. I don't think in Gilbert necessarily.
No,
Yeah, so-
Gilbert's up
So there are other factors, but the sale, let's just say the sale price of new construction, and that's not even getting into what are the property taxes which are
Right.
lower here, higher there. I mean, there's so much more to it.
School districts.
Yeah.
Yep, school districts.
But as being a Chinese head for
Yeah, it's
Story City and Nevada both have a lot of, not old homes, but price point starter homes because of their older
Housing.
I mean,
housing demographics.
if somebody is interested in that, Story County just completed a housing assessment for Story County, excluding Ames, because we had just done this
Okay.
ourselves. So if you're really interested in the Story County housing story, I didn't mean to say it that way. The story of housing in Story County, the county just completed that, and it has some good information to kind of give you a lot of background on the smaller towns that are in Story County, and also rural housing as well. So it's something, if you're interested, you can.
Mhm.
Right, and I know we draw from Boone too, and they have already I'm wrong to say older houses, but already pre-built houses that come up for sale quite regularly in 800 to 1,000 square foot house. And that's where the people like to start at. And like I say, with the infills, the infills, we'd probably do something. It's still going to be at least 100, but 200,000, like you were saying. But
Yeah, I mean,
but
we have to, right, we're this winter we'll have a program to build affordable housing at 321 State as our own property, and we're going to be subsidizing that, but we'll have a true idea just through our world, which we're not going to have economy of scale, so we're probably going to pay where we will be paying premiums over the development world, but we'll have a good idea of what you can really spend to build a house and what size you get, because we have to do that this winter.
Hey, Kat.
Back to the housing thing, just 2 comments. I wish I could find the policy, but we did talk about the split that we would like to see for the mix of
I was wondering about that, or if there was any comparison that was done with other similar like communities in terms of, is this normal what we're seeing, this reduction, I guess, in owner
So
occupied
I think it's the fact that we're the college town that went
Okay.
recently through that boom in enrollment was the biggest factor. I think.
Okay.
I know there's a policy in here, and essentially, I want to say we want to flip it. We want to look at planning for 60%. We'll call it ownership housing, not detached single family ownership housing, which could be attached single family, detached. It could be condos. It could be anything. And 40% multifamily.
Did you off the top of your head have a split on the percentage of student population versus non-student population in town?
Yeah, it was in
Yeah,
here,
yeah,
at
that
least.
was
So we did that for the projections.
Yeah.
Are you asking what do we think is the resident student enrollment population?
Yeah, there you go. There's
Yeah.
graphic you're looking for.
I don't know if I'm looking for a split in the student population, but just student population versus non-student, and if at all, and how that might impact the desired split that we are thinking in tenure.
Yeah, so we isolated an estimate of what we thought the student population. So I always, whenever I go to a meeting, I say student enrollment does not mean everybody lives in Ames. So there's different factors that we back that down to. I think off the top of my head, we assumed that there was a resident student population of between 25 and 28,000. 10,000 of them live in the Iowa State housing facilities. And these are just round numbers. So we're talking about 15 to 18,000 students living in housing off campus in the community. That's kind of the rough range that we're going to say for planning purposes. That's what we're assuming. And then we assumed that based on ISU's input and the declining enrollment to date, we're not projecting increased enrollment above the prior peak. So it might go up to 35 again at some time in the future, but we're not saying the enrollment's going to 40. So we need to be aware of that student housing demand. And that was one of the failures in the last plan, was it just assumed Iowa State would not change. But when they changed their philosophy, we didn't adapt either. So this one is taking that same approach. Hopefully our eyes are wide open this time, that if there's a clear signal that enrollment's different, then we need to look at what that means and address that. So we're really looking at housing, non-student housing, with the 6,000 units that are projected to be needed to serve that 15,000 person population. And then we projected out of that 6,000, roughly, I think it was a 60-40 split. I know it's in here, but I obviously can't put my finger on it right now.
Sounds mostly right.
And that 40% is more based on the fact that we are a college town. So we're always going to have a little bit more need for a rental housing environment than your average city. And it's also based a little bit on the trend that because of affordability, there is a pressure to continue to keep building multifamily rental housing. And that was a big demand. And we think that would still continue for the next 20 years too. So it's a little bit on the high end at 40%, because we just have a tradition of really not building less than that. Typically, we're building more than that. And it kind of is at the high end of a national trend, is how we looked at that when we put that figure together. So you might say in a non-college town that has a long history of just being your prototypical homeowner-based kind of environment, you're probably looking at 20% multifamily, maybe 25%. And then when the millennial generation really came into full force, we everybody across the country really saw that percentage of rental increase up to 30% or higher. Basically since the recession in 07 and 08, you just saw that rental demand increase not really subside all the way through the last decade. So you saw a much higher percentage across the country, not just the way big cities traditionally have way more rental than they have homeowner ownership. You saw it across the board in suburban towns and towns like Ames as well.
What I think we need, though, is some way to promote ownership over rental, because by having ownership, you're invested in the community. By investing in the community, we make Ames better than having scads of transient.
Yeah, I would say that paradigm's a little bit on its head probably in the last 15 years, to just assume. I think we've seen more people choose to live in a rental environment that are still invested in a community rather than they're choosing to rent because they are intentionally transitory. We clearly have a ton of transitory people. They're here for 1, 2, 3, 4 years,
Yes.
no reason to stay because they're here for college. But you also have a large bulk of people that are now interested in renting just because they don't want to own a home, but they still want to stay in Ames. And that's that product of the recession. That's the data from someone like the Urban Land Institute would suggest that that's the case.
And I guess my perception in terms of the character situation is not that renters have any less capacity to care for their unit or care about the community. It's more the fact that they don't have control over maybe the property
Yes.
because
Yes.
To me, I think that
To
is
an
something
extent.
that can
So-
be, or if we are concerned about it, to me, that is something that can be addressed through our ordinances and other
Right.
regulations for, say, rental housing or stuff like that. That's kind of where that regulation needs to happen, rather than just changing the tenure percentage. Again, just given that it's a college town where you will end up having a lot of people who are sort of in that transitory sort of pattern of living.
Right. And I think the thing is, in terms of the character of the community, that's going to impact people's interest in wanting to then buy into or purchase homes in the community or in a specific neighborhood. So it goes hand in hand in some way because of that, is my feeling, I guess, on the matter. Is like people don't necessarily just choose to live somewhere because it's cheap or because it, is, transit oriented or whatever the case might be. People really love feeling connected to things, I feel like. And so creating that character is a necessity in a lot of ways to try to, again, encourage people to be connected to the neighborhoods and the community where they live. And so I think it just goes hand in hand. And I think that's what's hard to see is, again, the sort of transition to more of a renter occupied, where then the folks living in the community have less control over like the actual character potentially of their neighborhoods. And I do agree, Anu, that additional like policies and things like that could help to provide better structure. And I guess I got the feeling that was the goal kind of this plan as well, is to do more in terms of trying to develop that character, provide more structure to develop that character.
Yeah, and I think that's in the neighborhood quality principle
Right.
in the housing chapter, is getting to some of those things that if you are, it comes out and says we support the rental code. We want to keep quality. It supports property maintenance codes. It's a comprehensive plan, so not everything's about getting a building permit. It's trying to give a sense that as the city, these are issues that may be valuable to us to maintain integrity of neighborhoods, regardless of the occupant type. Is it an architectural question? Is it a property maintenance question? What are those things that affect that character of the neighborhood? And from the last thing I want to say on that apartment side of it, what this plan is trying to also articulate is, and we're not in a student boom right now, but when we were, it was a constant struggle to say we don't want to build niche housing for students because it doesn't adapt over time to a different market. So we went through a huge amount of student housing before at the end we were able to kind of switch it to a little bit more adaptable options. And this plan's a lot clearer that we aren't interested in niche housing. We don't want to see that as the primary way you serve a student housing. It might even be a senior housing push. So the next push we probably see is going to be, there's always going to be niche senior housing, but just to see everybody wanting to come in and build senior housing isn't going to necessarily address all of our housing diversity goals either.
I think you're already seeing some of that senior housing push. but
A little. We haven't seen it to the level that I would think we would see it by now,
Yeah,
actually.
I think it's still coming. But what I'm saying too, the quality, if we keep the quality of the neighborhoods, I think it'll actually generate more business as are willing to come in because they know they have a stable workforce here that they can draw from instead of, if they have all kinds of rental properties, there's nothing that says that all these rental people are going to stay around. Because they're rental, they can go in at any time, about a year's notice.
I mean, you could do the same with a house, though. If you own a house, you could have it for a year and choose to sell it if you really wanted
Right,
to.
but it's,
I mean,
you're a lot more invested in the
No.
house than you are in an apartment.
Kelly, could you speak a little bit to or point me to where, if at all in the plan, does it speak about, I mean, I know you talked about infill housing, but existing houses in neighborhoods that cater to student population, either through rental. I know we went through this whole big rental code change thingy last couple of years, but can you speak to how the existing housing stock, existing single-family housing stock that we have in the city today, has there been discussion or thinking on how some of it at least might be able to cater to the needs of students? So it kind of addresses and fits into that adaptable housing that you're talking about. So it's not a multifamily apartment complex that may or may not see the same use once student population drops down, but a single family that can be converted into units or back and forth. Has there been some talk about looking at that housing stock and seeing how that might address the needs?
I'm not sure I'm quite following that. So I'll answer what I know and see if it's if it's related to exactly what you
Sure.
might be
And
asking me.
if it helps, think about just the immediate ring of houses by the campus, especially on the west side.
Uh-huh. So our experience is that once it becomes a rental, it's highly unlikely to ever change back. So if the idea that a house is adaptable to different tenures, sure it is. There's no codes that restrict that whatsoever. If a property became multiple units, so we physically reconfigured a single family home into 2 units, I do not believe it would come back. I think there's been 1 or 2 homes that I'm even aware of in 8 years that were 2 family that became 1 family. And we don't allow you to do the opposite. We don't allow you to take a single family and carve it up into multiple units anymore. So our history is it doesn't convert back. And we've been concerned about the consumption of the smaller houses into investment properties that will never turn back into an owner occupied home. And the policy the council discussed was, how would we ever financially incent that? Since we lost our regulatory controls, the state took our ability to weigh to kind of dissuade the market from doing what it was doing. So we can't really stop it. So the only question was, is there a way that we could incent the other activity financially as the city? And when we went through that study issue, the evidence seemed to be it was very expensive and with limited success in terms of intervention. So city council might revisit that, but we just don't have the funds to make a significant dent in taking a rental property back to being even desirable for an owner occupied home. Because so often it's snapped up for investment purposes before it's even on the market. Or if it is, it's gone because that person will pay more. At least from my experience, when I look at a house, I look at what I have to do to live in it. An investor doesn't look at it the same way. So it seems those are the stories that we were faced with when we talked about that. And that was about 2 years ago where council had a study issue about that.
That's what I've seen is that what I keep on calling starter homes, the 1,000 square foot and below starter homes are being eaten up by investment groups.
Yeah, and so that's another national trend.
But
So you have real
it's a
estate
terrible
investment
trend, I
trusts
think.
building and buying neighborhoods for the sole purpose of renting them. It just is a thing, and in Iowa we can't control that.
And it hurts, in my view, it hurts the neighborhoods. Because now you have
It depends. Yeah. I mean, there are definitely some negative externalities from high concentrations of rental properties. We, as the city staff, through discussions with council, totally understand that. Our hands are just tied at this point.
Mhm.
I guess it sort of goes to that sort of broader philosophical sort of question. You do have your age group, the younger age group, working age group that we are talking about that the city has been attracting and hopefully will continue to attract. How do you match them with houses in the neighborhoods so that they may then, and that's where your sort of community character piece does come into play. Because if you can possibly try to match them with those existing housing stock, then they may become more invested and interested in wanting to stay in those neighborhoods. And then, it's sort of that, but how as a city, how do you do that? That is something that's very tricky, and I don't know if that's even possible.
And yeah, so then you get into it's the market, and
Yeah.
government's
Right.
impact on the market is pretty limited and extremely time intensive by staff.
And there's no way to limit investment groups buying single-family houses,
Not in Iowa.
not in Iowa. Again, ever since, okay,
So we did for all of
yes,
6 months
yes,
have a limit on the percentage of rental properties, or but that was no longer allowed.
understand. It's just frustrating that the neighborhoods that I know, there've been whenever a starter home appears, it disappears because of the investment groups. But not all the time, but
It's a common
Surprise-
story. It's definitely a common story that we've heard over the last 5 years.
yes.
I want to respect everyone's time, and I'm wondering if there's anyone in the audience that might want to speak, and what the kind of standard or procedure, if we let someone from the audience have an opportunity to speak or air any concerns, or is this purely a discussion?
So it's intended to be a planning and zoning commission discussion. If you want to take comment, you can. What I would do is anybody in the audience that wants to formally comment, please provide that in writing to staff through an email to staff, or we have a comment tool online. So when you go to Ames Plan 2040 on our website to see the plan, see the maps, there's a comment tool right there, or you can contact Eloise or myself with questions or comments as well. This isn't a public hearing. You will eventually have that. So
And
it's up to,
they've had public comments on the 2040 plan.
well, council at different points took public comment, especially during the growth area evaluations. They had a whole separate hearing for, I think, over almost 50 people came to speak about selecting the scenario areas. But that was the biggest night of input, besides the different offline comment options. And then we also have 2 outreach events. Next Wednesday, we'll have an online forum where people come. This is advertised through a Zoom meeting. We're going to run a presentation and field questions or inquiries from the public in an online setup. And then on the 27th, which is a Monday, so almost 2 weeks from now, we're going to have a drop-in open house at the library. So if you want to come visit with staff at the library, you can also do written comment cards or whatever at that point too. So the library one's meant to meet your schedule. It's from 4 to 7. You don't need to be there at 4. You can come and stay for 10 minutes. You can stay for 2 hours. We'll have some staff available to talk to people about the plan.
But on the 2040 plan, I've seen a lot of interesting that I'm looking forward to, like the gateways. I think Ames really needs to do more with the gateways coming into towns to let the people know that, you're in Ames and we welcome you. And, they've done some things on the east end of down at I-35 and 30, but we can also do stuff on Lincoln Way coming into Ames from on the west side, and 69 on the north. And some kind of make people say, hey, I'm in Ames, I'm glad to be here now. Instead of, hey, I'm in town, let's just go where I want to go. And
I think that's there was some emphasis in the old plan slightly about gateways. I think this is trying to think of it a little bit more broadly than just literally the entrance to the city, and think about like the length of Lincoln Way or the length of South Duff as being a gateway that extends for more than 1 second when you drive by, but it's an experience as you're on our main arterials. It's what you recognize for the city. So it's articulating it a little bit differently. We'll definitely need a follow-up plan to implement that strategy. This alone doesn't get you there. It sets policy up for council to do things in the capital improvement plan.
Right, I understand that the 24 plan is fairly vague on a lot of things, and I don't understand if it's trying to give direction or because it doesn't give a black and white direction for anything.
It does not.
No,
It-
I
it
just
is-
said that.
It is flexible.
Yeah.
Well, flexible means that there's no guidance.
This also means there's minimal commitment. So that's well, there's guidance. So I would say it articulates values and priorities, but it doesn't mandate that they apply to all situations. The only thing, there's a few things that are probably hard and fast. The growth areas are pretty clear. One thing that's different from the old plan is it does include, so like for example, out west, we have multiple land use designations out here rather than a bubble that says we're going to grow here. So the 97 plan was a bubble plan and said we'll figure it all out through village zoning. And arguably that didn't work out as well as we thought. We ended up with a lot of homogenous things and we didn't get exactly what we were expecting. So this plan is less flexible in the sense that it has some expectations to start with, but it gives a lot of flexibility within the designations about how things really are going to turn out. So it's going to be incumbent on the implementation measures to really reach the vision. It's going to be the zoning standards being updated. It's going to be doing a streetscape or a gateway plan to get those things done.
Was that kind of council's goal, is to have that flexibility then?
I believe so. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. So when we started out, it was very, very clearly articulated. We want flexibility in the plan, which was, I would say, a reaction to the last plan being viewed as rigid.
Okay.
Even though it didn't define very much in certain areas, it was viewed as very rigid.
Okay.
So this plan was definitely a reaction to that and intentionally designed to be flexible.
Vague.
Flexible.
Vague.
I think the flexibility gives you the opportunity to adapt to changing situations in the future. That's kind of one way of looking at it. Yes, it doesn't tell you exactly line by line of what you do in a situation, but that's exactly like 10 years down the line, if something's changed with ISU or with Research Park or whatever, the council, the commission, and people have that ability to still respond to that in a more constructive manner. That's kind of how I would term that flexibility, as it's the opportunity to adapt.
Yes, and I think as quickly as things change these days, my view is that we want to be adaptive. It's going to allow us to potentially be more resilient just in terms of development in the future. That's my perspective, just based on how quickly I've watched, again, the development occur and the different markets kind of shift around. So I find value, I guess, in the flexibility, but I also I like structure, so I feel like it's too.
That's I think a good point. I think the plan was trying to have a framework,
right. Yep.
and sets the boundaries to allow for that adaptability. I think that's what we were going for. If we succeeded, I don't know that we know that yet, but I think if you were to look at it through that lens, is there should be a clear structure and framework for what we're trying to accomplish, and there's a lot of flexibility within that boundaries to reach that vision statement or reach those principles that are articulated with every element. That's the style that
So
we
you
were
should be a
going
little nervous.
Right. Exactly. Well, no one knows what 20 years is going to bring,
no.
honestly. And just knowing that essentially today, this very moment is probably the slowest things are ever going to be. And it's just going to keep moving more and more quickly from here on out. Like
Switching gears a little bit, I know we've got a bunch of comments still coming in. Do we have an idea of, as this gets adopted, are we setting some kind of timeline or something to look at the plan in the next 5 years, 10 years? Is there
Yes,
some sort of a
there's-
timeline that we are building into this?
So there's one chapter that's not here. There's no administration chapter or implementation chapter. So we wanted to get the plan out, and then it's missing a total implementation chapter. So we are in our current plan, the commission's supposed to, not we, the commission's supposed to review it every 5 years to assess its validity, basically. So that review kind of kicked off the whole idea that we should update this. That was like 8 years ago. That notion kind of got into everyone's mind. We just need a new plan because the reviews we're just past those. So we'll have something in that chapter. I would say it's very common to say it's a 5-year, no longer than a 5-year review.
Do you, there's a section in here, the review and approval process for land use, like on page 34. Do you envision the process itself that you take projects through changing much?
And you're looking at page 34.
I mean, I have my day job, I have the opportunity to talk to people that develop and work on projects in communities all over the place, and including Ames. And one thing that I hear from folks that develop in all sorts of different communities, that it's hard to get stuff done in Ames with respect to the process. Now, I can't define what that means or what they mean, but I hear it.
So I would say the emphasis on page 34 is to try to be more intentional about identifying interest groups. So if you think about how do we involve more people in process and decision making, maybe at the plan level, I would say that's the main emphasis here versus how do we change a public hearing process or a subdivision approval process. This plan wouldn't tell us that we should change those things.
Okay.
It's saying that there should definitely be more of an emphasis on public awareness or public involvement in some of those decision policy practices. It's obviously saying we need to be transparent. I think that's obvious that we would always be that way.
Mm-hmm.
We are now. It does not tell us how to change or to address any specific kind of permitting process. And what that means that it's hard to get things done must mean it doesn't match the plan, because anything that matches the plan is approved very quickly in Ames. You don't review apartment buildings in Ames, right? They're approved by staff unless you need to change something to do something that you want. So hopefully we've addressed that by having 4 areas to expand into. It doesn't mean that we're subsidizing development, so it might still be hard to do development. It might mean that we are supporting different infrastructure to see things happening quicker, but those are decisions that the council make from more of a financial perspective than a land use perspective.
Mm-hmm. I guess that second guideline kind of addresses what you're trying to get at, Doug. It says apply guidelines and processes in advance that increase the level of predictability to all parties in the development process.
Yeah, and
That gives some flexibility to
and maybe the
council to
flexibility
change.
of this helps with those comments.
Right,
that I
right.
hear.
I think the where
Yes.
side of that is definitely addressed by this, because it's not 5 people that you can go talk to buy land to grow in the city. There's still limits because you have to touch the city, but it's a lot different in that perspective.
I see from what I saw reading through the 2040 plan, our major problem with expansion, though, is a lot of Iowa state-owned property that wraps around us. And I know there's nothing you can do about it.
Yep.
If somebody wants to give a piece of land to Iowa State, they get it and they never let go of it. And
Well, that's not 100% true, because they did sell some land in Ankeny to a pretty large developer that then became Prairie Trail. So it does happen.
To help box us in more with the replacement dairy farm. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, they talked about that on page 21 because I made a note of it also.
Yeah,
Just
so-
seemed like a lot of the land that's open now that's in the Ames Community School District is university owned.
So we worked around that with the scenarios.
Mhm.
That's how I mean, that was definitely taken into account. We're not assuming that Iowa State disposes of any land so that we can grow into it. We definitely worked around that.
Hoping for 2 acres here or there, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. So the South is what it is.
Not gonna happen
It's
anyway.
not going to be towards the dairy farm. That's just not going to happen. So we had to look other places.
So, and I know that takes out another part of the taxonomy, I guess is what you called it. We don't get taxes from the Iowa State land.
Correct.
And
So any government-owned land does not pay taxes.
Right.
Federal, state, local. So this map that I put up is it's the fringe relationship. So we've mostly talked about within the city, but we do have our 2 mile extraterritorial jurisdiction as well. We did write into the end of the land use chapter the kind of the basic premises of how we would view the fringe area of the city. And we have a fringe plan. You just amended it tonight to allow for a piece to be annexed. That fringe plan expires in less than a year with Story County and with Gilbert. Story County and Gilbert have both asked that we work on an update to that plan. And City Council has agreed that after this plan is done, which essentially means where we are now, that we've kind of cemented what we want, that we would also participate in that update. So we assume as staff that we will get to a new fringe plan and a new 2080 agreement. But this comp plan is stating kind of some of those initial positions that we have. And one thing that's a little different, this map, which is that hatching that kind of wraps the city, anything that was in a scenario, whether it was tier 1, 2, 3, or 4, we're showing as urban reserve, meaning the city's not really willing to see rural development happen in any of those 4 quadrants out there. Just because we said it might be beyond 2040 before we get there, we're really staking out a much larger future to say that those areas should not be rurally developed and only be looked at as future urban areas as well. So that's it's not dissimilar from the current plan, but it's a little more aggressive and really being clear that all of this area should be reserved for future consideration.
And our Ames is, goes up to 190th Street is where our influence stops. And then Gilbert takes over.
Nope. So the way that would work is we only show our 2 mile buffer on this map. Gilbert also gets a 2 mile buffer.
Correct.
So it splits equidistant from each city, where our subdivision jurisdiction ends and theirs starts.
But ours ends at 190th.
Yep.
No, it goes north.
How far from?
Probably about 3, I'd say we're about 1.5 miles apart from their closest point to us. So maybe about 3/4 of a mile north of 190th Street.
Okay.
So I'm not sure. Yeah, I think their southern boundary is just off of the map here. So I would say it's about 3/4 of a mile to the north. And that's just your rural subdivision authority. It's not your annexation authority. So you can annex up to another city. Now they can contest that at the state level and say they can serve it or do different things, but you're not limited in how close you can annex to another town. Now this plan's not saying we're doing that, but I just want to clarify that your rural subdivision authority is different than your annexation authority.
And I noticed something on there in the 2040 plan also. There's they're thinking about an overpass on 190th over the UP tracks.
So that's in the Forward 45 plan that
Right.
if the build out of these areas occur as projected, it's conceivable that we would need to add an overpass on 190th Street to deal with the volume of traffic that could occur on that street. As much for safety, it is just for not for operations, but for safety reasons.
Yeah, I know there isn't a lot of trains on there right now, but
So that's in the long term. A lot of things have to happen before that can be justified.
anybody else? Okay. Move on to item number 8, commission comments. Anybody have any other comments?
So I just want to kind of close that up really quickly, just so it was just really a discussion again. So there's no motions tonight. I guess my general sense is you understand the plan. You've identified its features, good or bad.
But there's no,
Flexible or not.
that, I understand there is no plan to the plan. Okay. I got that part
Not money
down.
well spent. No. So there, I think we just had a general discussion tonight. I didn't
Right.
hear like a burning issue that has to get forwarded on to city council from anybody. I'm just checking if there is something like that. I'd like to know tonight if that was the
The
case.
only thing I have is the Western Gateway entry into Ames. I think we have to protect that so it doesn't turn into another trailer park that we just got rid of.
So you're talking about in the Boone in the west,
Yeah, right off
the way area. You're not
what
talking
is-
about Highway 30 kind of things. Okay.
No, yeah, the entry right into Ames as it is right now. And, and as I see it, the whole urban fringe part, I understand that we're going to go across the Union Pacific Main.
We are not.
Sooner or later, we will.
So in this plan, that's one of the differences. We used to have the Northwest Growth Area, which would have been taking North Dakota up to serve that.
I'm talking about County Line Road up north past the tracks, and then then east off of there where there is some.
So that's this area right here. If you can see my cursor, that's what you're talking about, John. So all of
Yes.
this, yeah. So this is Onion Creek right through here.
Right.
And then, so we used to have Northwest Growth, which was this area plus the area that John's talking about. That's no longer in the plan. For us to annex into that area, you would need to amend the plan. So we know a lot about that area. We've studied it as a city for 20 years, but that is not serviceable today. The city would have to invest in a sewer trunk line.
Correct. And water. Well, Exira has the water up there right now, as I understand it.
Well, so Xenia controls water everywhere. That's
Yes.
not a unique issue to there. There's very little land that we, as the city of Ames, control for water rights, water service territory rights.
But it wasn't too long ago, we approved a buildup by Onion Creek.
We allowed a lot split in the county that I think was a net increase of 2 houses on
Right.
County Line Road. They're rural. They're
Right.
rural sit.
So, and there is up in that area on the west side of County Line Road where you can see there is a housing development up there right now, and I can see it going back towards the tracks and east from there, but there's no plan for services at this
So
time.
we wouldn't. So where you see the blue hatching, we would not allow for that to happen. So the fringe plan process could change that, but if the fringe plan does not identify a rural residential area where you see that blue hatching, there is no subdivision allowed to less than 35 acres.
So you have to have 35 acres of
That's
a
the minimum,
subdivision.
that's the minimum lot size in county zoning for ag zoning. And we wouldn't have a way to say it has to be more than that. So we can say you can't subdivide less than 35 acres.
Oh, really?
So each one of those squares could have a house, but to subdivide it into 12 houses, that's not going to be permissible without a very deliberate fringe plan amendment process.
Which is always possible,
Well, anything's possible to be amended.
because it's fairly
So
vague.
no plan is permanent. Yeah. So
But I happen to notice that
yeah,
that
have
acreage
not-
up there is for sale right
Yep.
now. And
So is acreage north of 190th Street. It doesn't mean that it's able to be developed.
okay,
Well, it's not so vague. I mean, Kelly, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, it's
The
not-
the goal is that even with the lower density residential, that you're still wanting to see 5 units per acre.
Yeah. So we
Roughly.
carried forward the same minimum density
Okay,
expectations of the
so-
current plan. I don't think it's that vague about the basics,
Right.
about how the land use is supposed to lay out, where you can subdivide and where you can annex. I think it's vague. I would say where there's a lot left to be done at the implementation stage is how those transitions and those context sensitive decisions, mostly in the infill environment, how those are going to be done over the next 20 years. I think the growth areas, those bubbles aren't perfect. I'm not saying that the commercial high density mix there is exactly going to be that, but you'll make those decisions when the zone changes come in. But I think it's pretty clear that we expect, where we expect a commercial node to be, or where we expect higher or medium density housing to be, that's what's different. We didn't say where medium density housing should be. We didn't say where the next set of apartments should ever be built in Ames. This plan gives you a little bit more vision around, we want nodes that we can serve. They make sense to have a radial transition out into neighborhoods. Very common practice, not groundbreaking, but it does add that predictability for certain areas that we didn't have in the last plan.
And did you get the feeling that developers prefer this style, I guess, where they have a little more flexibility?
I would say that the early on input is we need more general locations to grow.
Okay.
I think in the sense of the land use mix, this is what the city thinks is best for the city rather than what's best for a developer.
Right.
So the developer should be conforming to the growth needs of the city within those areas that we prefer to be.
Right. I feel like it's an intricate balance sometimes because, yes, definitely adhering to a certain level of structure and policy.
Right. So the same kind of comments. We expect minimum density. Our minimum density is higher than most cities. So if you wanted to come in with large estate lots,
right,
that's not going to comply with most of our standards. So those are the kinds of things that are definitely not vague. They are an expectation for future performance.
Kelly, this is something I should have checked myself, but could you speak a little bit to what's going on or what's proposed corner of North Dakota and Ontario, sort of that reliable street area? I've always thought of that as a potential for like a pocket neighborhood commercial.
There's nothing directly planned. It's late, so there's no intensive planning about it. It's just it's zone neighborhood commercial now. It used to be zone general industrial when it was a different use than it is today. We rezoned it to neighborhood commercial to allow for that adaptive reuse of the facility.
Has that area been on the council or staff radar, sort of, in terms of what staff or council might like to see?
It just wasn't a significant enough area for us to spend any significant amount of time on. So it's really just that opportunity area for future consideration. So the NCMU it's more open to considering a change rather than lock it in to say it has to be this. And if it's not that, we're going to amend the plan. This gives you an option to kind of talk through different ways to do that as commercial or as mixed use to fit what works there.
I really like that pocket. I've always thought that has this niche, small scale retail, limited retail sort of potential to it. And it could turn out really cute. I mean, especially with all the stuff that's already happening there, with a couple of the businesses with Reliable Street, Lockwood. I think that area's got potential.
So that's a good example then where we have identified it is different and the plan embraces that and basically says we can see other things happening there. I would say that's already baked into this plan for that particular area.
Sure. Thank you.
All right. Well, that's what I have to say for this. As I said before, I got my spiel out about public options for input. I hope council can get the public comment and give us direction on what to do in October. We do have to write that implementation chapter. There might be changes like we talked about the matrix. Maybe that moves to an appendix and we make that clear what we're going to do with that land use compatibility matrix. But I hope to be back to you in November, fingers crossed, with a public hearing to have your formal recommendation to council. That's our goal.
With something not as vague, right?
It's not vague.
Okay.
It's flexible.
Flexibly vague, okay.
I think good job and kudos to staff this kind of undertaking is always really big and requires a lot of effort and time, especially when you do it along with all the other day-to-day responsibilities that need to happen. So well done to everyone involved.
We're very excited to be near the end.
The zoning code update next, right?
Might prefer that.
Don't say
we
you
are
might be
not-
speaking too soon.
We have not committed that we are rewriting the whole zoning ordinance. That happened last time. Maybe we need to do that, but maybe we don't.
Okay, you're done with the 2040 for now.
Yep.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments on the 2040? Okay, moving on to item number 8, commission comments. Anybody have any comments tonight?
Nope.
Okay. Item number 9, staff comments. Anything for the next time?
Trying to think.
The boss says no.
It wasn't on the draft. I know that. Yeah, there could be something come in this week, but I don't know that there is. I don't really have any other kind of general comments to give you tonight.
Would that be the second week of October?
It'd be the first Wednesday.
First one.
First Wednesday. Okay.
Yeah. So that would be
Which
the
we-
6th is is
Okay.
potentially your next meeting.
Okay.
So you get 2 weeks off regardless. So
I'll
the
be
6th
on tour to COVID part 2, second leg of our COVID tour. I'll be in Florida.
on the 6th. Okay.
Trying to get it, huh?
We're trying to get it. I haven't gotten it yet.
Trying to do the herd immunity, huh?
Yep.
So,
That was, I think I mentioned that several months ago where, my wife and I had our 40th anniversary set up 2 years ago. And so this is our 40th anniversary 2 years late.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
or we should be congratulating her.
Yeah, she's the one that has suffered all these years.
So next meeting, Kelly, in October are 6th and 20th, right?
Yes.
6th and what?
20.
20.
I would be here for the 20th.
Okay. At this time, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I guess we don't need to do that either. We're adjourned.